welcome to a new episode of Rediscovered Movies. I'm your host, Nomfanelo. The film that I'll be discussing is Ricochet. Ricochet is a 1991 action thriller that's directed by Russell Mulcahy, who's known for directing films such as Highlander and Resident Evil Extinction. The film stars Denzel Washington, John Lithgow, and Ice-T. So here's a plot. So Denzel Washington, he plays Nick Stiles, who's the assistant district attorney of Los Angeles. So it starts off in 1983 where Stiles, he is a cop for the LAPD. And during a carnival, a criminal, or master criminal, Earl Talbot Blake, played by John Lithgow, he creates a scene after a botched drug deal. Stiles and Blake, they confront each other, during which Blake is wounded by Stiles and is later sent to prison. 7 years later, in 1991, Blake escapes from prison during a parole board hearing to carry out his revenge against Stiles. And what follows is a violent series of events that destroys Stiles' career. And this sets the stage for one last bloody duel between Stiles and Blake. The film was released in theaters on October 4th, 1991. It opened at number 2 with 4.8 million, where The Fisher King was number 1. It made over 21.7 million during its theatrical release. In terms of reception, on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 74% critic score and 52% audience score. And on Cinema Score, it has a B. The film is available to stream on HBO Max where it's available, so check your local provider. And I do want to mention before I get on to First Discoveries is that there was no streaming or VOD option for me since in Canada, so pretty much the only option for me to watch this film was to buy the DVD on Amazon. Now, I don't mind purchasing the physical copy of a film if I can't find an online option, but what I do mind is the quality, because the widescreen format with this movie is terrible. Because for one, is either in anamorphic or CinemaScope format, because the bars are larger than the picture, and with the picture itself, it's terrible format because clearly it's not remastered for today's lens, and you could clearly tell this was shot in the 90s. Okay, so let's go on to First Discoveries. So I think one of my parents, it might have been my dad, bought the VHS tape when I was young. So I don't really recall the events of the film at that time, but I do recall it was quite intense to watch because of the action scenes and the thriller, I guess, aspect of the film. So watching it now for the podcast, it felt for me, it was the first time watching it, even though technically I've seen it before. And I didn't know really what to expect from it, but I figured it would be on the levels of a popcorn film because of the screenwriter Steven D'Souza, who's known for writing screenplays for films such as Die Hard, Commando, and 48 Hours. So I figured it would be along those lines where yes, you'll get the action, and also with comedic moments. So after watching the film, I felt it was enjoyable in parts, but in terms of it as a whole, I'm not sure of its rewatchability factor. So Siskel and Ebert, they gave this movie a 2 thumbs down for their at the movies program. They pretty much describe it as ridiculous, goofy, embarrassing, unsavory, and distasteful, but stylish, ambitious, and having smart dialogue. And I would pretty much like agree like with that in terms of my like overall thoughts of the movie, because like I feel like on one hand like it's supposed to be, yeah, like this popcorn flick where like you're supposed to enjoy like the action scenes and also like the villain and the hero, but at the same time I felt like I don't know, like it's just some of the like either like the writing like is so like absurd, and at times like it was just quite hard to watch. So yeah, like I wanted to enjoy this movie more as a whole, but yeah, I just couldn't bear to rewatch it because usually like for the podcast like I would watch the film twice. And this time, honestly, like I didn't felt like rewatching this movie because I felt like in my first viewing, like I have a sense on what I want to discuss, and like also too, like I mentioned, like the rewatchability as a whole just wasn't quite there for me, which I'll explain in the highlights and lowlights section. And another note that I'll make is that I noticed that it's produced by HBO Pictures, which, even though like the film is distributed by Warner Brothers, so I just wonder if this was supposed to be a TV movie, because usually with HBO on the film side, they make movies like for TV. Now I might be wrong. Maybe like they did make movies for theatrical release at the time. I wasn't able to find that information, but it seems to be clear that this was intended for a theatrical release. So if any of you guys know if this was intended to be a TV film or not, just let me know on social media. All right, let's go on to the highlight section. So what I liked is the whole like cat and mouse aspect of the film between Nick and Blake. So pretty much first like Nick he shoots Blake in the leg at the carnival, which gives him a limp. And then Blake he gets obsessed with Nick after he's put in jail and decides to torture him as revenge. And pretty much like from there, like he stalks Nick everywhere, like from like the restaurant when he's there with his colleagues to like his house pretending to be like a repairman when Nick and his wife are not there. And he also leaves like these like tapes, like for one like of Nick's kids sleeping at night, like which he like assumes that he killed him like with an axe, but it turned out to be a hoax. And also to another tape of like his torture when he gets assaulted, which I have thoughts on that in the low light section. But essentially, like Blake, he uses these series of events to drive Nick insane, to like destroy his reputation, like not just as like an attorney, but I guess as like the ideal like family man and so forth. And pretty much like his former partner Doyle, and I would say too with Odessa, with like Ice-T's character, they pretty much are the only ones that believe him. And I guess like this ends like with Nick faking a like suicide attempt, which drives Blake insane because he wants Nick to live and to suffer for the rest of his life, which is interesting. And pretty much Blake he gets his demise when he falls off the tower. So yeah, like with them going like back and forth throughout this movie is entertaining, and I would say like the performances from Denzel and with John Lithgow like really like heightened those scenes, because with them like being veterans of theater. Like clearly, like I think they really elevated their characters more than what was on the page. Another aspect, yeah, there's a lot of absurdity with this movie, like in terms, yeah, like of the dialogue and like the action scenes, which, yeah, makes it entertaining. So it's really one of those films where, like, if you just turn off like your brain and just, go with suspension of disbelief, you will thoroughly enjoy this movie. But if not, then I feel like, yeah, you're not gonna get a kick out of it. So the parole board hearing scene, that was quite unexpected because I figured like maybe Blake would have some sort of like remorse for his actions, but clearly he does not. Because he insults one of the parole board members and kills him, and then which leads to this whole like shootout like with Blake and the inmates with the security guards there. And yeah, and a lot of like people died during his escape scene, which is insane. And also, yeah, like the deaths, yeah, included his court appointed attorney and the librarian, because they didn't really do like anything wrong. Because honestly though, like it could have been, he could have done a more subtle approach to escape, to, not, you know to, let's say, like cover, not cover his tracks, but yeah, like it could have been like just more quiet about it to not draw a lot of attention. Yeah, pretty much. But clearly he wants to make it loud, and then the insane part is that he kills one of the inmates that he escaped with, and kind of like puts the body in this truck that he drives off a cliff. And then it's funny that people assume that with Blake is dead, but in reality, he's not. But I guess it is what it is. And also too, like with the absurdity, like Blake is obsessed with like I get that he has a grudge, but I feel like he's kind of taking it too far, because there's like a moment where like he sees an image of Nick as an attorney from a newspaper clipping, and he becomes immediately obsessed with it. He would photocopy it multiple times, like which he would copy it like frame by frame, which is insane. And honestly, I don't get why there weren't so many red flags for the other people to notice. And there was like a moment where like he was doing some sort of gladiator style like fight sequence with his cellmate. So looks like they're both wearing like these handmade like suits that's like made up of books or newspaper clippings with tape, with masking tape. And so after like Blake's kills a cellmate, he removes like the page of Nick as an attorney, and he gets like his accomplice or partner Kim to remove the blood so that he could keep that paper. Oh my goodness, like ridiculous. But again, if you just go with suspension of disbelief, you'll enjoy this movie. Also, to another aspect, I liked the pacing, because again, I don't know like if this was intended to be a TV movie or not, but I liked like it had a short runtime, like which was like an hour 49, so close to an hour 50 minutes, and it pretty much like gets to the point of the story and doesn't really like drag off like to focus on different storylines that doesn't relate to the main storyline of the film. And another aspect to I would say like yeah, the visuals. Like I would say yeah, like it's you can tell like with some certain shots it looks like it's done in the 90s. But there was one I liked was with Blake's introduction because we see him like covered like in dark lighting as Kim is talking, and then he like comes out of the shadows when he's like in the alley, which kind of makes it intense. I'm like, whoa, because there like he's clearly established to be the villain of the film. Also, too, like Nick's relationship with the media is interesting because, like, after he puts Blake away in jail, he becomes famous. Like, the media made him famous. And then, like, as a lawyer, he really embraces the media and they seem to be on their side for the most part. And then once, like, Blake enters the picture, like he kidnaps him and all that jazz, the media pretty much turns on him for being crazy. And then it's funny that after like Blake dies, Nick he kind of like rejects and like trolls like the media, like particularly with Gail, who he interacts the most in terms of the reporters in the movie. Because I wonder though, like when he was a cop before, like did he embrace the media or he did not care? Like I'll probably say like he probably didn't care because he's like a low level cop at that point. So I figured like he just wants to do his job. He wants to, you know, get his degree to become a lawyer and so forth. So probably he wants to be low key. And yeah, I just found like in terms of his relationship with the media, like is quite fascinating. And yeah, and last point, yeah, I think like I mentioned, yeah, the performances, yeah, from the cast, particularly with Denzel and with John Lithgow, I felt for me saved the movie, and they really like elevated like their characters more than what was on the page. So let's go on to Lowlights. Okay. So the first scene, this is after the opening credits, which obviously is fairly like outdated with the graphics. But clearly like yeah, with the credits it's really established to be like a very like serious and intense movie. And then it's funny that like after that, it cuts to like Nick playing basketball with Odessa and his partner Toyle, which is odd. And I felt like it's clear that this is supposed to be a setup scene because it's supposed to introduce Nick with Odessa, like with their relationship, with Nick's future wife Alice that he meets and flirts with there, and his partner Doyle. So yeah, like because clearly like that scene doesn't really like fit well like with the rest of the movie, because I would say preferably like after the credits it could have started like with them with Blake and Nick at the carnival, like when Blake is about to bust his drug deal that goes haywire that leads to the hostage situation, and then on with the rest of the movie. Because I don't know why, honestly, that basketball scene is there. And I found like it's kind of rare to see like a cop wanting to be a lawyer. I would say with the exception of Carisi, like from Law and Order SVU, because he started like as a cop, and then I guess once when one of the lawyer leaves, they're like, "Hey, like let's promote you to be a lawyer," which is kind of weird. But I felt like with that one they kind of did it because of cast, and probably they didn't want to hire another actor to be the lawyer, but whatever. So, anyways, back to this movie. So, yeah, like it's fine. Like if he wants to be a lawyer, but I just felt like he wasn't believable as a lawyer because clearly, as a lawyer, you know the laws that you shouldn't break, and it's clear that Blake, sorry, tongue twister. It's clear that Nick breaks plenty of laws to capture Blake. And he uses a lot of like theatrics, like in that scene in the courtroom, to kind of like prove his point to put that criminal away. And yeah, I felt like he could have been like a detective instead of lawyer, like maybe like after the hostage situation, after he gets promoted to detective, maybe years later, like he's at a higher level, like I don't know, would be like a captain or something, and he has ambitions to be like the chief of police, which will maybe like allow him to spend more time with his family. But then that kind of like is up in the air once Blake re-enters the picture. So I felt like if he stayed within the police force, it would have been more believable than him becoming a lawyer. But that's just my opinion. So I felt like, yeah, there were some conflicting tones with this movie. So I wasn't sure if this movie was intended to be serious or if it's intended to be funny. Because I felt like, yeah, because you have Steven D'Souza like attached as a writer in this movie, I felt like they wanted to go in the direction of like the Die Hard, like pretty much like with the action films that he wrote screenplays before. But I don't know, maybe like it could be directing choice. I'm not really sure, but it's just it did not work for me. Um Also too, I felt like with some moments were quite graphic. Like I didn't mind like when you see people getting like shot, like you could clearly see the blood and the gore. Like I didn't really mind that too much up to a certain point. But I would say like that scene when Nick gets assaulted by the prostitute, or you would say sex worker, yeah, Wanda. I felt, yeah, that wasn't necessary. Like that could have been removed. Because I get, yeah, like Blake, he wants to torture Nick. Because it's fine if you want to like drug him or like beat him up or something. But to have him like sexually assaulted by a prostitute, I'm just like, why? And yeah, there was like a scene when I guess Nick's partner Doyle, he runs after Kim, if that's his name, into the alleyway where he gets shot by Blake. And then and then afterwards like he throws the gun towards Nick, who catches the gun, and he tells him, "Oh, like I never like touched the gun," because he was wearing like gloves or something. And I felt like, why, Nick? Why did you touch the gun that was used to kill your partner? Because that does not make sense. Because you imagine, as a lawyer and a former cop, you would know better, but yeah. Also, too, like, I was wondering, like, why does Blake have a glass eye? Because unless if there's a moment that I missed that was not explained. And I would say that with the glass eye and you have the red hair and the earrings, he kind of looks like, in a way, a pirate. But I think here he's supposed to be intimidating, but I felt like his look could more pared down. I think, yeah, keep the glass eye, keep the red hair, but I would lose the earrings. Because also, too, so clearly, like, Blake wants revenge against Nick, but it doesn't make sense for him to keep him alive at the end of the day because, yeah, like, because he wants, like, Nick arrested after, I guess, his partner gets killed, but it doesn't happen because of the fake suicide attempt. And then he's like, no, 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 like, I need you alive. And then, which pretty much exposes himself to the public and all that stuff. But, but again, I was thinking, like, if Nick died earlier, then the movie would have been over. Because, I don't know, like, maybe, like, I don't know, like, maybe, like, I don't know, Blake could have tried to, like, kill him, like, after torturing him. But maybe too, like he kind of like gets a kick out of torturing him. But again, like yeah, he Blake has issues. He has plenty of issues. Okay, so another point. So like when Nick kind of claims, well, we know that Blake is alive. So like when he tries to like mention that to everyone, it seems like no one believes him. And then when all these weird stuff happening, like with Ferris, his partner, I think is what the assistant ADA. I don't remember, but he like Blake clearly kills him, but it's framed like a suicide attempt, and that he is a child molester and stole embezzling funds. So I'm just wondering, like, with all that stuff happening, people, like, they seem to not question the situation because clearly it is out of character. And with them knowing Nick for, like, what, 7 years plus, like, I mean, wouldn't you know something is off, like with his behavior? Because I figure you would know him at that point, and that they pretty much automatically assume that this guy is guilty. So, shame on them. But it was nice that I guess with Nick's partner Doyle and Odessa, they believe him, but for everyone else, shame. Even too, I guess, with the wife at a certain point, because she seems to be more like afraid of him because of his, I guess, odd behavior. But it's kind of weird that, like, she doesn't toss that off to the side because I'm assuming, like, if you're married to a person, like, you would know them. And clearly, this was not Nick because it's out of his character to do. So also too, I wondered like what's the deal like with Nick and Odessa because we see them like playing basketball at the beginning, and but there seems to be some conflict with them because Nick is a cop and then Odessa is a drug dealer. But I guess like there's a moment where like Nick visits Odessa and then there's some sort of standoff where Nick he gets the grenade threatening to blow everybody up, but then that gets de-escalated. But then Odessa, like he decides to help Nick to go after Blake once his reputation is ruined. So I just wonder, yeah, like what's the deal like with their relationship at the end of the day? Like I just wonder, like with Odessa, like did he wanted to become a police officer or did he wanted to be a lawyer, like or anything outside of being a drug dealer? I just wondered, and I just wondered like what happened Yeah, I wasn't too sure about their relationship. Like also too, like I wondered, like what happened with the $10,000 that was stolen from the fundraiser that Ferris was supposed to produce, but because it's weird, yeah. Because I just wondered, like, did Blake spend the money? Because the money had to go somewhere, and it's just hilarious that like they don't like if they assumed that he was embezzling funds with Ferris, like they would obviously like check records and all that stuff, but clearly they're terrible at their jobs. Also too, so Blake he's kind of put in a cell like with Jesse Ventura, and he Jesse Ventura like he's a very like very built like muscular, well kind of toned down, but clearly like he's physically intimidating. But yet Blake is able to like knock this guy out like nothing because I'm which I do not buy. Yeah. Um I because I get that, yeah, like you want the villain here to be not just like intimidating like on an emotional level but also to on a physical level, but I didn't buy the physicality in terms of Blake overpowering his cellmate. And lastly, like so with Gail, apparently Gail is the same character, the reporter from Die Hard. So I just wondered why. Because it's fine if you want to have like her as a reporter, but they could have just changed her name. I think for legal reasons, because if Die Hard is under 20th Century Fox, while this movie is under Warner Brothers, maybe they came to some sort of agreement, maybe. But yeah, I felt like that could have been altered. All right, let's go on to trivia. So, according to reports from members of the audience during the first test screening, it was originally more violent and been reported that the final version was heavily cut. So, according to an interview, the director gave a scene where Nick is physically abused by Blake until he pukes, and Blake gets a sponge to clean him up. Apparently, it was one of the scenes that was cut after the test audience reacted negatively to watch a white man torture a black man. Some trailers show shots of scenes which are not in the movie, which is yeah interesting because like I said, like at moments it was quite hard to watch, and yeah, I would probably agree with the test audience that yeah, like it could have been more toned down. And maybe too like because you don't want to show too many scenes of torture, because like are we just having this for the sake of torture, or does it have a reasoning behind it? Because I feel like with this one, yeah, less is more. Also too, so the film is supposed to take place in the same universe as Die Hard. However, some of the supporting characters went on to have different roles in later films, most notably John Amos. So again, like I didn't get why they had to tie in with Die Hard. Like I get you have the same screenwriter, but for me, yeah, like it just does not make sense. It doesn't really add anything to the franchise. So the original screenwriter, Fred Decker, wrote the movie as a Dirty Harry series film, but was deemed too grim by Clint Eastwood. Later, it became involved with Joel Silver. It was intended to have Decker to direct with Kurt Russell to star, which didn't happen. But yeah, that's yeah interesting. I could see some aspects to that, but I think like clearly here with this version they wanted to have Nick to have flaws and just, I guess, being a Mary Sue, if that makes sense. The fight scene in the prison cafeteria between John Lithgow and Jesse Ventura recreates the final duel from the director's earlier film, Highlander. There are multiple visual references, including the use of swords, the Foley effects, the backlit windows, and the camera angles, including the famous tracking shot of the camera rolling along the floor. So I thought, oh, that was interesting. Yeah, because I remember, I did watch Highlander. And I guess with that prison scene, I'm like, okay. Like, I would have to rewatch that, for sure. Also, too, Denzel, he worked out for 3 hours a day, 6 days a week for 4 months, so as not to look out of shape for his shirtless scenes. Interesting, because I remember, like there was a shot like when he is dunking a basketball in the opening sequence, and it kind of shows like a low angle like of him leaping while we see like his abs. So I thought, okay, like, like he clearly is in good physical shape here, and I'm like, okay, good for you. So John Lithgow, apparently he almost never blinks during this film. He wore a contact lens to give the impression that the character had a glass eye. Interesting. Because I just wondered though, like, in terms of the character having the glass eye, like, was that included in the script, or was that something that John Lithgow and probably the director came up with? Because that's why I wonder, because again, I felt like with the glass eye, even though it was supposed to be intimidating, like I didn't really see a purpose for it at the end of the day. And lastly, John Lithgow, he wore a brace on his knee to help ensure that his limp would be believable and consistent throughout the film. I'm like, okay, that's, dedication, for sure. And lastly, I'll ask this question. Should this movie be rediscovered? So, I don't really have a direct answer, so I'm going to say yes and no. I'm going to say yes because I would say the performances from the cast, particularly with Denzel and John Lithgow, were solid and really elevated the movie more than it was intended to be. And it's entertaining, like as an action thriller, and that if you just turn off your brain, you'll certainly enjoy this movie for the most part. But for me, I would say as a whole, it just does not work. And there's quite a lot of absurdity in terms of events with the plot and probably character motivations. All right, so that pretty much concludes this episode of the podcast. So you could follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Nomfanelo. You could follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at RDMoviesPod and use the hashtag RDMoviesPod. You could answer the feature question on Spotify. You could like, share, and subscribe to the podcast on your preferred platform where available. And you could submit questions, comments, and suggestions by email, which is rediscoveredmovies@gmail.com, or you could leave a short voice message on anchor.fm/rdmoviespod, which could be featured in a future episode. So I want to say thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of the podcast. Until next time.